Good morning, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself. ATP. All that out in the corner of my eye there wasn't on. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan LS Pierce's Ukraine War news update, first part thereof, for the 12th of November 2023. I have to go to my son's rugby match in a short while, so this will be quick, and it will be quick because actually there's not a great amount of news out. It's a relatively quiet night. Let's go to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find those caveats in the description to this video found below. Right. We are seeing massive losses in a number of categories, particularly personnel losses. 1,100. Is that the highest? I think it might be the single highest loss of personnel, or at least in the top three over the course of the entire war. 1,100 is huge. What does it signify? So even if that's not 100% correct, so maybe you can take 30% off that, that is still a massive number of personnel lost. Some people are saying that 70% of losses are taking place in the Avdiivka area. They are doing this third wave of attacks in Avdiivka, and this kind of represents or reflects that activity. 7 tanks lost is not the hugest number, biggest number of tanks, but 32 armored personnel vehicles is a massive number of APVs, and is what you'd expect if the Russians are doing these large, even if they are meat wave attacks, so infantry-led attacks, they're going to be delivered primarily by APVs, and those APVs are getting hit. Some are claiming, reporting from Ukraine, suggested that in their video, the Ukrainians are still seeing huge Russian attacks in this northern Avdiivka area, where they are able to pin down the APVs as they come, across the normal routes to hit the front line in the areas that we've seen them. So not only are the troops and vehicles getting hit as they reach their destination, but they're getting hit on the way there, and that is causing a huge number of losses. They are still reaching their destination in enough numbers to make eventually a critical mass of people, so that they are starting to get over the railway line and attack into Stepover and so on and so forth. But they are doing so by taking pretty tremendous losses as well. 32 artillery systems is a massive number as well in that category, and shows across the front lines a degradation of that key category. 2 multiple launch rocket systems and 1 anti-aircraft warfare system is still useful for the Ukrainians to degrade. 12 drones, 1 cruise missile, probably not from last night but the night before. Indeed, there were very few aerial threats from cruise missiles and drones overnight. 19 vehicles and fuel tanks, still fairly high number, not the highest, probably in the middle actually of the range of losses in that category. And then 9 pieces of special equipment, that is a high loss for there, and I think that's going to be made up by intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and electronic warfare equipment, as we have seen over the past, since the beginning of the counter-offensive until now, although I'd say the counter-offensive is over. But from that kind of May to now, we have seen the Ukrainians really try and hammer at ISR and EW equipment, but particularly in the last week or so. Now, unfortunately, Andrew Perpetua hasn't released his list of equipment lost overnight, over the last 24 hours, which is a real shame, because he says the losses I found today are so stupidly lopsided that I don't even want to publish them. Although that one Gimlet strike into a pile of trucks was cool, here, look at that instead. So he's just showing you footage that we've seen of other stuff, of equipment being lost and whatnot. Now, I was wondering, is that lopsided towards the Russian or towards the Ukraine? I think it's that the Russians have lost so much equipment, and then you only have to look back at, 70 bits of equipment just in those categories, and then another 30 bits of equipment down here and elsewhere. So that's 100 bits of equipment lost in a day. That's surely going to be reflected in a lot of footage, and I think that's what Andrew's saying. Lots of people in his thread saying, please still show it and so on. And I've actually messaged him saying, I really find your list very useful. Are you going to put it out? But it's in the middle of the night his time. So it's a shame. So I think that indicates that the Russians have taken a lot more losses than the Ukrainians. That ratio is firmly in favor of the Ukrainians. Um, but we shall see if he does produce that. Now, this bit of news was doing the rounds last night. The 810th Russian Marine Brigade lost its latest chief of staff at Krinky. Previous one died in August, so they've had a bad time of it in terms of losing their higher officers. So, Russian serviceman volunteer Mertz points out that the officer who died in Moscow on November the 8th, Colonel Yan Sukhanov, was chief of staff of the 810th Brigade, who is currently firefighting in Krinky. This in turn indicates a level of control Ukrainians have in the area if such a high-ranking officer who wouldn't appear in the trenches was mortally wounded. So he actually got, as far as I can work out, wounded in Krinky, taken to Moscow to hospital and died there. Long post with other thoughts on the Krinky situation from Mertz. Right. Because there's not a crazy amount of news to go through, I am actually going to read this out, although this is kind of like a frontline bit of news, but you might be interested. I did a Kherson Dnipro River analysis last night, so go and check that video out. So there is very little time to write, much less repeat what has been previously written many times. The most important, one, the enemy continues and will continue active offensive action, so this is the Ukrainians, understanding that before the next mobilization in the Russian Federation, which was nevertheless postponed until after elections, scare quotes, he still has the main window of opportunity in which permanent mobilization and Western assistance can give him the desired advantage for large-scale front movements. Okay, interesting bit of speculation here, which is, firstly, that the Russians are going to wait to mobilization until after the elections, as according to a Russian source. So they agree with that. What we've been speculating for some time now, that Putin won't want to mobilize before his elections, even though they are sham elections. He wants them to have the air of reputability, of air of being like decent elections. So he doesn't want to ruin any chance of people voting against him by doing a mass mobilization before the elections. But this guy also says that the Ukrainians have a window of opportunity to do their own mobilization before March, which could have an effect on the front line. And I think that is an interesting idea. Number two, a bridgehead was created in an area that, on our side, was very poorly covered by very weak troops. That's interesting. Well, because firstly, it's a river. They wouldn't. And secondly, on paper, the positions were much stronger than in reality. Two really interesting points there. The Russians had weak troops there because they didn't think that it would be attacked because it was a river and the Ukrainians wouldn't cross the river. And also because actually the positions weren't as strong as they were on paper. Possibly because a lot of those fortifications and mines and whatnot have been washed away in the dam getting destroyed at Novokhovka. Right. Number three, a bridgehead has been created with the objective of pulling there and destroying as many of our combat-ready units as possible from other areas, for example, from Robotyne. So I've talked about how reserves have been pulled down from Robotyne, and here he is confirming this, from where the fastest firefighters were transferred. So this signifies that it's a bit of an emergency for the Russians, and they brought as quickly as they can the nearest troops, which is up the front line from Robotyne. This is, I think, again confirming what I've been saying, which is good to know, but also shows that they don't have the reserves in depth. Anyway, when all those who arrived are properly drawn into the fight in this area, a blow will follow in another place. In other words, they are weaker in Robotyne, and we've seen the Ukrainians have a little bit of success there over the last few days. I don't know if that is connected. Where the enemy will find a weakness, that will give quick success with minimal losses, which can be converted into attracting and disintegrating our last reserves, which are being transferred to this area for attacks off the wheels. In other words, if, for example, the Ukrainians, because the Russians have brought down their reserves, well, they're not really reserves, they're fighting force from Robotyne to Kherson, then the Ukrainians take advantage in Robotyne, and then the Russians bring in whatever they can, disintegrating our last reserves, which are being transferred to this area for attacks off the wheels. So this then, produces a real issue for the Russians. Anyway, number three, in these battles, we will again lose a bunch of experienced people whom we might not have lost if the country's leadership had soberly assessed the situation back in spring 2022. But this is about the question of traditionalism. Tradition is tradition. Time after time, delaying the adoption of the inevitable unpopular measures as much as possible. Time after time, they're still taken at the moment when the benefits for them are minimal and the political losses and the military losses incurred before this are maximum. Just how quietly and inaudibly for the mass reader of the internet were the truly significant unpleasant events took place, those that, having gained a critical mass, will collapse the situation can be assessed by the fact that our crackling Z telegrams passed by the news that on November the 8th, 2023, at the age of 44, the Chief of Staff of the 810th Separate Marine Brigade of the Black Sea Fleet, Colonel Yan Alexandrovich Sukhanov, born 25th of November 1977, died in Moscow at the Burdenko Hospital. The 810th, which is no longer a secret to the enemy, is currently fighting precisely near Krinky and arrived there as one of the first fire brigades. The Chief of Staff of the brigade is not a company commander who can be killed somewhere on the front line. The Armchair Z community can thus roughly imagine how tightly the enemy controls the space around the bridgehead from the air. What this is saying is, like, as Dmitry has already said, you don't put a leader in the trenches, right? So if they are being hit and taken to hospital, that means that the Ukrainians really control the entire kind of battle space, the whole area there, such that they can hit these higher commanders. And we've seen Skadovsk get hammered a number of times with high-ranking officials supposedly killed there the other day. Number 4, I would suggest at the end of the war, we stop with red-white fights and deep philosophical discussions, because now we need to think most often about how we don't screw up the war and the country along with it. I mean, this is all okay. The English is a bit weird with some translation issues there, but wow, I mean, this is another really critical analysis of what is going on, in this case in Kherson, that gives you an indication that all isn't well with the Russians. So I kind of go up and down, like many of you do, with like how I feel about the counteroffensive, how I feel about the Ukrainian position. But it seems to me that the Ukrainians are in a better position now than they ever have been in the war. They've got more and better equipment, better training. They probably need more boots on the ground is their biggest thing, which is actually indicated by this post to some degree. But I think the Russians are in the weakest position they have been, and that will only continue going in that same direction. So that, like I talked about a year ago, every single week the Russians get degraded, and every single week the Ukrainians get upgraded. It's whether that can make a difference when it comes to things like minefields and fortifications, etc., etc. And those are the big challenges for the Ukrainians. It's not the Russian capabilities, it's not the Russian capacity in terms of their fighting forces. It's the capabilities of their fortifications and defense lines that are causing the problems for the Ukrainians. Otherwise, I think the Ukrainians would be territorial much, much better off. So, yeah. And then this is what Andrew Perpetua was referring to in his video. So in the area of Donetsk Oblast near Avdiivka, Ukrainian Special Forces soldiers discovered 2 Russian electronic warfare systems, the R330 Zhitel and the R934 Boryglebsk 2, and adjusted artillery fire to destroy them. So these are fairly high value, particularly I think that latter one there, really high value bits of kit that are part of the Russian electronic warfare and countermeasure capability that are being degraded this time in Avdiivka. We have seen that happen in the Kherson area. That is giving the Ukrainians an advantage there. And if they can eke out that same advantage here in Avdiivka, that will really help them in defending against the swarms of Russians. If they can get some kind of aerial advantage in terms of drone warfare there, that will be really good for the Ukrainians. Sorry, this is just out of position. This is the actual story of the chap of the 810th. So Sukhanov died in Moscow at his hospital, is reported on November the 8th. However, until now, the circumstances were a bit murky. According to Russian sources, he actually died in Krinky, left bank Kherson, where the Ukrainians are creating the bridgehead. The 810th has been hastily deployed there to plug holes. Check the account given by the Russians themselves. On other matters, the bridgehead is expanding fast, with unconfirmed reports suggesting that current maps based on geolocation might be truly understating its actual size. This is a claim that Ukrainians might be doing a little bit better than the maps suggest, even in Krinky area. But that also, this guy died down in Krinky and then was taken to Moscow. Other claims that he was injured in Krinky and died in hospital in Moscow. And that's exactly the claim that we just saw. So this is the translation of what Dmitry from War Translated has posted. So moving on to distance strikes now. Very quiet night, really. Overnight, Russia attacked Ukraine using two Kh-59 cruise missiles, missiles of which one was shot down. In addition, one ballistic missile, presumably Iskander-M, was launched, which hit open territory near Mykolaiv. Several residential buildings were slightly damaged due to falling debris. That reminds me, actually, I don't have it. Let's just search for that. Sorry, it's just reminding me of something that happened yesterday. So this is a report that a Russian soldier has filmed a Ukrainian Storm Shadow or Scalp cruise missile coming down and impacting about 50 meters away from him. Some people are claiming this is air defense. It is more likely, considering this is a completely intact missile, that this was either it going off to its safe place. So I think, as far as I understand it, if they are unable to hit their target, one of the safety precautions for these missiles, unlike the Russian missiles, is they have a pre-designated safe space that they can go and explode in. So like a field somewhere outside that's not going to kill anyone. This is kind of so that it doesn't veer off or miss its intended target and blow up, say, a shopping mall or something like that. So it's a safety precaution that Western NATO missiles and ordnance generally has that Russians aren't really bothered with. Or it has got a user, so a human error in programming or in some kind of flight path change or something like that, or it malfunctioned, right? Those are far more likely than air defense, I think. But let me know what you think. Anyway, this is pretty crazy. So this guy then gets up and runs off. So he's not hurt or anything. So just that interesting that has taken place. So anyway, this Iskander-M was launched, hit open territory near Mykolaiv. So maybe that has also gone and hit a field or something. Several residential buildings were slightly damaged due to falling debris, although that could indicate it's been hit by air defense. So, highlights of the night, or not highlights like that, but main things that happened. Quiet night. Nikopol district has been hit a number of times overnight with artillery. Dnipropetrovsk regional administration has reported. That's not unusual. It happens sort of routinely. Defense, that's the other side of, just to let you know, where Nikopol and Marhanets are. These are places that get routinely hit. They're the other side of the reservoir, the Zaporizhia reservoir. So you've got Nikopol there and Marhanets, and these, as industrial towns, are very often hit by artillery from this side of the reservoir. Although there was some counter battery fire that's taken out some artillery this side yesterday, if I remember correctly. So anyway, Defense Ministry of the Russian Federation announced about the allegedly downed Ukrainian drone over the Belgorod region. So there's a Ukrainian drone in Russian territories, so on and so forth. Let's look a little bit more into strikes. Breaking news yesterday in Melitopol, where local pro-Ukrainian channel reported a powerful explosion in the occupied city. So there was a hit there. Don't know what it was. We quite often hear of hits and then don't get the details on them because obviously it's in Russian occupied regions. And the Russians hit the library in Kherson, reported the head of Regional Military Administration, Alexander Prokudin. The regional library, named after Honchar, was under fire. Rescuers recorded significant destruction. Is this Russian way of doing things, isn't it? Destroy culture, destroy identity, destroy civilian infrastructure, and not take out military targets. This is, again, another example of, I don't know, the Russians being kind of the bad guys in this. Right, talking about bad guys, no. Yesterday I talked about how Elon Musk came out and said some pretty egregious stuff in an interview that basically attacked Ukraine and victim blamed Ukraine and said they should stop sending people to the trenches to die. Said nothing about Russians doing that and said nothing about the Russians attacking. This has really pissed off a lot of people, as you can imagine. It annoyed me yesterday. So Dmitry from War Translated, still waiting for Musk and co. to condemn North Korean supply of armaments to Russia, which prolongs a war that Russia started, right? So again, stop looking at Ukraine Ukrainian people dying because they're trying to defend their homeland from being invaded and saying, well, that's really bad. You shouldn't send people to die. And how about looking over at North Korea and say, you shouldn't send armaments to Russia that Russia can use to kill those people? Stop blaming the victim. Oh, it's your fault you got burgled. It's your fault you got raped. It's your fault you got this. It's your fault you got that. No, how about the people that actually do those crimes? How about blaming Russia here? As you can see, I'm getting annoyed because it really annoys me. It's just like people sucking this stuff up annoys me, and the people saying it annoys me. Right, the root cause of this disinformation annoys the BGs out of me. Anyway, Ukrainians themselves are getting continually annoyed. We've seen them fight back with kind of like messaging in occupied areas when he claimed that there's no resistance in Ukraine, and they're like, no, we are here, thank you very much. But then people like Elon Musk not urging Russia to withdraw from Ukraine, not condemning Russia's inhuman atrocities in Ukraine. Instead, he spends his time ridiculing Zelensky and spreading and promoting the Kremlin's vile propaganda. What he's cynically pushing for is Ukraine to surrender, for Ukrainians to surrender their freedom, for his idol Putin to be handsomely rewarded for murdering and raping and torturing Ukrainian men, women and children. So this is the kind of reaction you're seeing. Jay in Kyiv saying in an interview with a member of the Russian government's paid influencers program, Lex Friedman, Musk again calls for Ukraine to surrender and for us all to sympathize with all the Russians that are getting hurt while murdering people in Ukraine. So this hasn't gone down well, basically. Ilya Ponomarenko, who's a really good journalist, saying, it's so telling that the eyes of Musk and the likes of him, everyone must file for negotiations, concessions, compromises for peace or an impossible surrender. Ukraine, the West, anyone, but never Putin and never Russia, the aggressor that unleashed this war. The Kremlin owes no one nothing, apparently. Owes no one anything. So that is just, I just thought I'd report the reaction to that. People didn't take kindly to what he said. The Washington Post has written that the coordinator of the attack on the Nord Stream pipeline is a senior Ukrainian military officer, Roman Chavinsky, a colonel in Ukraine's Special Operations Forces. Now, this is an article in the Washington Post, where it's a joint article. It's also in Der Spiegel in Germany as well. So, Ukrainian military officer coordinated Nord Stream pipeline attack. I never know quite what to feel about these kind of articles because, one, they do the old, as you can see here, senior Ukrainian military officer with deep ties to the country's intelligence service played a central role in the bombing of Nord Stream natural gas pipeline last year, according to officials in Ukraine and elsewhere in Europe, as well as other people knowledgeable about the details of the covert operation. In other words, who knows? Like, there is absolutely no provenance to this article and to these claims. Now, they may well be absolutely true. I'm not denying the truth of these claims, but it's really tiring when time and time again it's like, yeah, some random people we spoke to said some stuff. Anyway, it's true. It's like, because they go on to say, actually, I haven't highlighted this second paragraph, but it's important. When you do kind of philosophy a lot, you look at how arguments are constructed and whether they really stand up, and whether you have things like begging the question, a circular argument where you assume the truth in the premise and then you have the conclusion and you're like, ta-da, and here's a conclusion. Yeah, but you assume that in the premise, so it's just you're arguing in a circle. I don't know if this is going on here. The officer's role provides the most direct evidence to date. So it's like, this is the most direct evidence. Yeah, but where's that evidence coming from? Well, some people we spoke to. So is it really evidence if we can't say anything about where the evidence has come from? You might as well just say, I opened a letter on my doorstep today that said that Chavinsky did it. This is the most incredible evidence we've had since. Well, yeah, but you're kind of sort of begging the question with the quality of that evidence. But again, you might have access to some really good people here, really good sources, but you're not really communicating that to me as the reader. And so I'm left not as firm in my belief about the conclusions here as you might be. I might be wrong, but it's difficult to be as staunch in my conclusions, given that I don't know who you're referring to at all. The officer's role provides the most direct evidence to date, tying Ukraine's military and security leadership to the controversial act of sabotage that has spawned multiple criminal investigations. And that US and Western officials have called a dangerous attack on Europe's energy infrastructure. I think the way this is framed is quite interesting. but it could well be true as well. So Roman Chavinsky, a decorated 48-year-old colonel who served in Ukraine's Special Operations Forces, was a coordinator of the Nord Stream operation. People familiar with his role said. People familiar with his role. What people? Just people. Managing logistics and support for a 16-person team that rented a sailboat under false identities and used deep-sea diving equipment to place explosive charges on the gas pipelines. On September the 26th, hey, my birthday, 2022, 3 explosions caused massive leaks on the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines, which run from Russia to Germany under the Baltic Sea. The attack left only one of the 4 gas links of the network intact as winter approached. Chavinsky did not act alone, and he did not plan this operation, according to the people familiar with his role, which has not been previously reported. The officer took orders from more senior Ukrainian officials, who ultimately reported to General Valery Zaluzhny, Ukraine's highest-ranking military officer, said people familiar with how the operation was carried out. Okay, again, random familiars. Some people have said that this article is a bit of a job on Zaluzhny, potentially. I don't know. Make up your own mind. They spoke on a condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive details about the bombing, which has strained public relations with Ukraine and drawn objections from US officials. Anyway, so on and so forth. It goes on to say Chavinsky is being held in a Kyiv jail on charges that he abused his power stemming from a plot to lure a Russian pilot to defect from Ukraine in July 2022, not the one that succeeded, another one. Authorities allege that Chavinsky, who was arrested in April, acted without permission and that the operation gave away the coordinates of Ukrainian airfield, prompting a Russian rocket attack that killed a soldier and injured 17 others. I wonder, I mean, is it a coincidence that he's in prison? Like, could this be Ukraine knowing that he did that, either trying to protect him or not wanting him to have arranged Nord Stream and arresting? I don't know. Or maybe these two things are just unconnected. Anyway, there's so much in this article, but a few other parts I picked out. In an interview with the Post in June of this year, Zaluzhny said the CIA had never asked him directly about any attack on Nord Stream. He said after the explosions in September 2022, he received a phone call from the then US chairman of Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley. Quote, he asked me, did you have anything to do with it? I said no. A lot of operations are planned, a lot of operations are going on, but we have nothing to do with it, nothing at all. So there is the Americans have asked the Ukrainians there through the top channels, and there was a denial from the Ukrainians. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean anything in terms of the truth of the matter. Some of those who described Chavinsky's participation in the Nord Stream attack defended the veteran intelligence officer as acting in Ukraine's best interest. They argued that bombing the pipelines helped to keep Russia from filling its coffers from natural gas sales and deprive Putin of a means to use a flow of natural gas for political leverage. Yes, there is that. I mean, you can have all the arguments, probably using moral consequentialism, where the consequences to an action beget its moral evaluation. In other words, you know, the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were terrible, horrible, horrific, but are justified as a means to an end, right? They brought about the end of the war, etc., etc. Now, that's a really prickly moral discussion to have. I've had that before, but that's a sort of thing you could apply here, which is, yeah, it's not great to blow up another country's gas pipeline, but actually, it had one of the biggest effects on stopping revenue to Russia. You could argue it had already been turned off at the time, but it couldn't be turned back on, etc. Anyway, in his statement, Chavinsky said, quote, I've devoted my entire life to the defense of Ukraine. He called the current charges against him related to the Russian airplane operation groundless and far-fetched, which I will definitely prove in court. But we don't know, and there are people defending him in court, but that I don't think has anything to do with the accusations to do with the Nord Stream pipeline. Anyway, that's an ongoing thing. You'll probably see a lot about that in the news at the moment. Right, just final random bit and piece, other bit of news to report. Something big happened today, said Anna Filipova. The first blood transfusion in a trench successfully performed by the 12th Brigade NGU. The wounded soldiers saved and will live. Finally, after 2 years of hacking the stupid system, overcoming red tape, enormous amounts of efforts put into changing the legislation and training medics, it's working. This is one of the most important strategic events in this war. Many more lives will be saved. I don't know the ins and outs of this, but it's obviously a big thing that they've been fighting hard to get, which is pre-hospital blood transfusions to be legislated for and allowed to happen on the front lines. And this could, well, you can imagine this could save, if done properly and successfully, save an awful lot of lives. I don't know how much blood they have near the front line, though, but this sounds like that's really good news. Anyway, that's enough from me for this first part. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all your support. Thank you so much. Toodle Pit, speak soon.